I've been spending a lot of time thinking about how a potential recession might affect some businesses, and I wanted to just give you some information that hopefully will help you and maybe the organization you're a part of prepare. So in looking back at the past, and the past is often prologue, we can see, and I'll link this in the notes, a Harvard business case study that did an analysis of the 4,700 companies that weathered recessions in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And what they found out of that 4,700 public companies was actually that 17% went under, they went bankrupt, they were acquired. But the good news is that actually 9% absolutely flourished. They outperformed their competitors in terms of sales and profits by 10%. So what made those 9% different? We know that it was because they prepared differently before the pandemic. And they focused on debt management, they focused on decision making, they focused on workforce management, and they also focused on their technology. So this is important because we're actually not in a pandemic right now. Potentially we're in the place right now where you can prepare. So in terms of a recession, that is when we see 2 or more quarters of negative GDP, gross domestic product. And even though we're not technically in a recession, we are seeing some indications and factors that lead us to believe that there is macroeconomic instability right now. And that could be inflation, it could be the layoffs that you're hearing about, it could also be those volatile stock prices. So in recognizing that there is instability right now in the market, we want to prepare, because we know that if a recession does happen, the past indicates that that could last for 15 months approximately. And oftentimes, and we have studied history, we know that a recession can often be the precursor to a depression. So the government, different parts of the economy, they're trying to calibrate right now to navigate and mitigate and not lead us into that recession-like state. What we know about a recession in terms of business is that it does have immediate impacts. We see already that there is going to be more decision maker involvement. We also see that it will be longer decision cycles, and we will see that companies start cutting back, but they won't be cutting back in the same way because not all cost savings are equal. We see, for instance, that companies, they know this, they did it during the pandemic, they can do with smaller real estate footprints. They can also do with smaller budgets, but they might not be able to give up some of their digital solutions, and that will be important. We also recognize that across industries, not every industry will be impacted the same. I work at LinkedIn, so I have a lot of access to data, and we can actually pinpoint with Sales Navigator the exact industry, the exact geo-targeting. But broadly, we see that industries that are most affected are those that rely on disposable income, such as retail, leisure, dining, and then industries that are less, have less erratic behavior would be the defense industry, for instance, because those budgets are often pre-programmed years in advance. We also see things like the healthcare industry, assuming there's not an external factor like a pandemic, the demand on the healthcare industry is pretty steady. And then we see the food consumption, the agricultural industry also, that can be a pretty resilient industry during a recession. So understanding the recession is important because we want to be able to be fluent when we're having these conversations, and also understand that no 2 recessions are alike, but just like anything with patterns, we can also try to identify some of the thinking that happens. So we see really 4 types of thinking. We see the slam on the brakes, like this is a matter of survival. Every decision I make is the question to me, is this a necessity or is this a luxury? Then we see people that are slightly more optimistic, but they're still being very conservative. Then you see businesses and individuals that have a lot in the reserves. This is not necessarily affecting them in the same way as it is affecting other people. And then the last group of people, perhaps those that were in that 9% that flourished, they're actually looking for opportunity during a recession. And that's important. And I know you might be thinking like opportunity during a recession, that might be counterintuitive, but there's actually some places and some opportunities, and I'll talk to you about them. So the first is that larger companies will start to acquire smaller companies. I mentioned that, during the last recession, 17% went bankrupt, and that gave opportunity to bigger companies to vertically integrate, to acquire, to absorb some of their competitors. We also saw during the recession that companies cut back. I mentioned that. So maybe before, where they might have outsourced something or brought in external consultants, that now is going to be a luxury. That is not going to be a necessity. And if you are a partner, particularly if you're a sales partner who's very sophisticated, you have a consultative mindset, you might be able to partner in a way now with a customer that you weren't able to before. We also talked about the global markets and how they're interconnected. And so now, if businesses are finding that they're having a shrinking consumer base, they might have to explore other regions of the world or other regions of the company. And that's a great opportunity to rely on data and some of that predictive analysis. During a recession, this makes sense. You're going to want to partner with other organizations that you deem reliable, predictable, durable. You obviously want to choose vendors and partners that are going to be able to weather the recession with you. So if you're choosing between two organizations and one is more in their infancy, has not weathered a recession before, or one is more stable, it makes sense. It makes sense to go with the organization that has a very strong brand behind it. Also, we know, we have experienced it. The value of $1 today is not what it was yesterday, and it is not what it will be tomorrow. Because of inflation and other factors, we're finding that the value of $1 has been buying less. So it makes sense for companies, if that's your company, to think about multi-year deals. If you can partner with an organization and gain that value in today's prices, that is probably one of the better decisions that you could make. In terms of a recession, we also see that it is a do more with less mentality. Companies are trying to reduce risk, and they're also trying to reduce their overhead. And one of the ways to do this is, of course, investing in digital solutions. And I talked about this earlier in terms of companies that flourished in previous recessions. What they focused on was technology. And why this is important. We know even in today's marketplace, we saw this with the pandemic, more and more people are digital natives. They like technology, it helps them scale, and it helps them have leverage. And when you think about your organization, like most organizations, it is a bell curve. You know that you have some very high performers, then you have those in the middle, and then you have those that are not where everybody else is. And so how can you do more with less? It's by shifting the curve. It's by making sure that those people in the middle are able to mirror and emulate the habits of your top performers. And data can often do that, right? It can give you that scalability. During a pandemic, especially if you're a decision maker, it's not necessarily about addressing the problem at hand, it's addressing the problem in the future. You need to be able to be agile and pivot quickly. And that is what data does, is it allows us to be predictive and also assertive in getting ahead of a problem. So I briefly touched upon also workforce management, and during a pandemic, what we'll see is some companies will have to reduce the size of their footprint in terms of their workforce. Now that could be through layoffs or that could be through attrition, but either way, you're going to need more productivity out of a lot less people, right? And how do you do that? You do that through scalability, through technology, so it's very interconnected. So if you get anything from this, it's that even though a recession can be scary, there can be a lot of negative externalities during recession, those who prepare before the recession are better equipped, right? And so that means the decision making, the debt management, the workforce, and also the technology. So who are you partnering with that allows you to have that data, that information to up-level yourself in those areas?